I sat cross-legged on the worn couch in the dimly lit living room, my eyes glued to the screen of my phone. The last rays of the evening sun filtered through the blinds, casting long, slanted shadows across the floor. It had been a few hours since my parents left for the weekend, and the novelty of having the house to myself was already starting to wear thin. I glanced at the clock above the fireplace, 8:13 p.m. They'd been nervous about leaving me home alone for the first time, especially with how remote our house was, tucked away at the end of a long, winding road surrounded by woods. But I had assured them, repeatedly, that I was old enough, almost 16, and that I'd be fine. After all, I had my phone, access to delivery services, and a whole weekend of freedom ahead of me. What could possibly go wrong? I wasn't afraid of being alone, but I had to admit, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Normally, the faint hum of the TV or my parents' voices would fill the air, but now it was just me, the ticking clock, and the distant creaking of the house settling into the night. I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, hoping for some background noise to keep the silence at bay. Flicking through the channels, I settled on an old horror movie. It wasn't my first choice, but I figured if I was going to be home alone, I might as well embrace the atmosphere. Besides, the movie was more campy than scary, something about a haunted house where the ghosts were overly dramatic, the kind you could tell were actors just having fun. Halfway through the movie, I heard a faint thud from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly brushed it off. Old houses make noises, I told myself. It's probably just the wind. I forced myself to focus on the TV, but my eyes kept darting to the ceiling, waiting for another sound. When nothing followed, I leaned back into the cushions, trying to relax. Then it came again, a soft, deliberate thud, like something heavy had been dropped on the floor. My stomach twisted with unease. Maybe I'd left a window open upstairs, and the wind had knocked something over. That made sense, right? "Don't be a wimp," I muttered to myself, getting up from the couch. I grabbed my phone, the glow from the screen lighting my way as I made my way toward the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the house like a warning. I paused at the bottom of the staircase, listening intently. The house had fallen silent again, but now the air felt different, charged, almost. I took a deep breath and started up the stairs, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But with each step, the knot in my stomach tightened. I reached the top of the stairs and stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. I walked toward my bedroom, the source of the noise. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I nudged the door open with my foot, half expecting something to jump out at me. But there was nothing, just my room, exactly as I'd left it. My backpack lay on the floor, the books inside spilling out, probably knocked over earlier when I threw it carelessly. I let out a long breath and laughed at myself. "You're such an idiot," I muttered, bending down to pick up the books. That's when I heard it, a low whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. My body froze, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It came from behind me, from the hallway. I turned slowly, my pulse quickening as I strained to hear it again. Nothing. I shook my head, trying to shake off the creeping dread settling in my chest. I must have imagined it. Yeah, it was just my mind playing tricks on me after watching that stupid horror movie. That had to be it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I walked down the hallway, checking each room as I went. The bathroom, the guest room, my parents' room, everything was exactly as it should be. No open windows, no signs of anything out of place. I must have just heard the wind. By the time I made it back downstairs, the uneasiness had faded, though it still lingered at the edges of my thoughts. I returned to the couch and picked up my phone, scrolling through messages and memes to distract myself. The minutes ticked by, and soon the eerie quiet of the house faded into the background. That is, until I heard the knock. It was soft at first, barely noticeable. I looked up from my phone, my heart skipping a beat. Who could be knocking at this hour? I checked the time, 9:37 p.m. No one ever came to our house this late, especially not unannounced. We lived too far off the main road for random visitors. I got up and moved toward the front door, feeling a sense of growing dread. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but something in me hesitated. I leaned closer to the door and peered through the peephole. No one. The porch was empty, bathed in the faint glow of the motion-activated light. I frowned, my pulse quickening. Had I imagined the knock? I waited, listening intently for any other sounds. The only thing I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees outside. Just as I turned to walk away, there it was again, a slow, deliberate knock, louder this time. My breath caught in my throat. I turned back toward the door, my eyes narrowing as I glanced through the peephole again. Nothing. My heart was pounding now, a steady thud in my chest that matched the rhythm of the knock. I stood frozen, staring at the empty porch, my mind racing. Should I open the door? Should I call someone? I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I considered calling my parents. But what would I say? Hey, I think there's a ghost knocking on the door. They'd think I was nuts. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just some kid messing with me, or maybe an animal had brushed up against the door. That made sense, right? I squared my shoulders and reached for the doorknob, determined to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I turned the knob slowly, the creak of the door sounding much louder than it should have in the stillness of the night. The door swung open. No one. My eyes scanned the empty porch, the driveway beyond, the edges of the yard where the woods loomed in shadow. The light from the porch flickered slightly, casting long, shifting shadows across the steps. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding shaky in the cool night air. No response. I stepped out onto the porch, my bare feet cold against the wooden planks. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of the wind in the trees. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see if anyone or anything was out there. Nothing moved. The street was empty, no sign of anyone having been there at all. I was just about to turn back inside when I noticed something small and dark lying on the porch, right where I had been standing. A key. I crouched down, reaching for it with hesitant fingers. The key was old, rusted and cold to the touch. It looked like it had been there for ages, but I hadn't seen it earlier. Where had it come from? As I stared at the key in my hand, a deep sense of unease settled over me. I glanced around the porch again, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows. But there was no one. Without thinking, I pocketed the key and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. I felt a little better with the door closed, but the house felt different now, heavier, like it was watching me. I made my way back to the couch, my heart still racing, my hands clammy. I sat down and stared at the TV, but I wasn't really watching. My thoughts were consumed by the strange knock and the mysterious key. Who or what had left it? The night wore on, and I found myself growing more anxious with every passing minute. Every creak, every gust of wind against the house sent a jolt of fear through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the unease gnawed at me. Finally, around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to sleep, to shut my eyes and forget about the strange events of the night. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the key still sitting on the nightstand beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that knock again, echoing in my mind. I tossed and turned, trying to push the fear away, but it clung to me like a dark shadow. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I drifted off. When I woke, the sun was already streaming through the windows, casting a warm, golden light across my room. For a moment I felt relieved, like the events of last night had just been a bad dream. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. And then I saw it. The key was gone. Panic surged through me as I scanned the room. I sat up in bed, my heart racing as I scanned the room, hoping I had just knocked the key off the nightstand in my sleep. But it wasn't there, not on the floor, not anywhere in sight. I checked under the bed, around the room, even in the hallway just outside my door, but the key had simply vanished. A cold dread crept over me as I stood in the center of my room, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone come into the house while I was asleep? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I'd locked the door after the strange knock, hadn't I? I rushed downstairs to check the front door. It was still locked. I checked the windows too, one by one, making sure none had been tampered with. Everything seemed normal, but the key was gone, and I had no explanation for it. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom's number, feeling a rising sense of desperation. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice warm and calm. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened. I didn't want to worry her, but the fear gnawing at my gut was hard to ignore. "Yeah, Did you or Dad leave an old key on the porch?" I asked, my voice sounding more nervous than I intended. "A key? No, we didn't leave anything like that." "Why?" I swallowed, unsure how much to tell her. "It's nothing, probably. Just found something weird last night." "Are you sure everything's okay? You sound a little off." I forced a laugh, trying to downplay it. "Yeah, just tired. Stayed up too late watching horror movies." "Well, get some rest. You'll be fine. We'll be home tomorrow evening, okay?" "Okay, thanks. Love you." "Love you too." I hung up and stared at the phone, feeling a little better after talking to her. But the sense of unease lingered. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the key had been just the beginning. The day passed uneventfully, though the sense of dread never fully left me. I tried to distract myself, watched TV, played video games, even did some homework, but every time I glanced at the front door or heard a creak from the house, my mind went back to that key. Where had it gone? By the time evening rolled around, the sky was darkening once more, and the house began to take on that same ominous weight it had the night before. The shadows seemed longer, darker, as if they were creeping closer with each passing hour. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I decided to go to bed early, hoping sleep would bring some relief. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressed in on me. I could hear every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows, and my mind twisted them into something darker, something lurking just beyond my sight. Then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat up in bed, listening. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the stillness of the house. I didn't want to go to the door. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay in bed, to hide under the covers like a little kid. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't going away. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I slowly made my way downstairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The knock came again, louder now, more insistent. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my heart racing. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I leaned forward and peered through the peephole. No one. I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging up the glass as I strained to see through the small, distorted lens. The porch was empty, just like the night before, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I stepped back from the door, my mind racing. What was happening? Was someone messing with me? I turned away from the door, intending to head back upstairs, when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint whisper, coming from the hallway behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The whisper was low, almost too soft to hear, but I could just make out the words. "Come back." I spun around, my flashlight casting wild beams of light across the walls, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, just as it had been moments before, but the whisper lingered in the air, as if whoever or whatever had spoken was still there, watching. My legs trembled as I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run. I stumbled up the stairs, not daring to look behind me, and slammed the door to my bedroom shut. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned against the door, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper again, calling me back, urging me to open the door and step into the darkness. But I didn't dare. I stayed in my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, I felt like I had been run over by a truck. My body was exhausted, but my mind was still buzzing with fear. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I had to get out, to go somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't here. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, barely remembering to lock it behind me. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air washed over me, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. I got in the car and drove aimlessly for a while, not sure where I was going. I just needed to be away from that house. The thought of spending another night there filled me with a deep, primal fear I found myself parked in front of a coffee shop in town. I went inside, ordered a drink, and sat in the corner, trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my mind kept telling me that it was all just in my head, that the stress of being alone, combined with the horror movie, had made me paranoid. But the other part of me, the part that had heard that whisper, knew better. As I sat there, staring out the window at the people passing by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Every time the door to the coffee shop opened, I tensed, half expecting to see someone or something step inside, looking for me. I spent the rest of the day in town, wandering aimlessly, trying to avoid going back home. But as the sun began to set, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. My parents would be back soon, and I didn't want to worry them. I had to face whatever was happening in that house. Reluctantly, I got back in the car and drove home, my stomach twisting with anxiety as I pulled into the driveway. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes staring back at me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The house felt even more oppressive than before, the air thick with an invisible weight. I walked through the rooms, turning on every light, but it did little to dispel the darkness creeping in from the corners. As I stood in the living room, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, I heard it again. A soft knock, coming from the front door. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candlestick from the fireplace mantel, and stormed toward the door, my fear giving way to anger. I flung the door open, ready to confront whoever or whatever had been tormenting me. But once again, the porch was empty. No one. I stepped out onto the porch, my eyes scanning the darkened yard. The wind rustled through the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. I stood there for a moment, my grip tightening on the candlestick, before turning to head back inside. That's when I saw it. The key was lying on the porch again, right where I had found it the night before. Only this time it wasn't rusty and old. It was new, polished, and gleaming in the faint light. I crouched down, staring at it in disbelief. How had it gotten there? And why had it changed? As I reached for the key, my hand trembling, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time, as if the voice was standing right behind me. Come back. I snatched the key and ran inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, clutching the key in my hand. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Not even close. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the polished key on my nightstand, the whispering voice echoing in my mind. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to stop until